most of what I'm going to say has already been said. So let me just tell you a bit of a story. And then why my claim for today is that we are all omnipresent in the era of the internet. That's my uncle. His name is Alvaro. And I remember in 2006, he came to me and he needed legal advice. I was finishing law school and he had a problem with the contract. And it happened to be the case that the contract was with a Peruvian party. So I was very young, I'm very young now, but I was very young back then, and I had this idealistic view of what lawyers do. And I love what I do, and I loved it since then. So I thought pretty much that we were like suits, right? So wearing suits and ties. And as Catherine said, it will be, you've been served, right? Like in the movies. It was all very dramatic, and I wanted to be those guys. But it was this. This is how so this is a real picture of how civil procedures look in Colombia. If you have a big case, it pretty much looks like that. And if you need to serve someone in the country, you will need to send all of those documents. Back when I studied, we had this public servant who was called the notifier, notificador. So a server who was supposed to take the documents from the office of the judge to the person's address. That person was paid by our taxes, with our money. And it was a huge disappointment. But in my uncle's case, it was even more difficult. He lived in Colombia, and the other person was in Peru. Neither Peru nor Colombia were party to the Hague Convention, so that made it even more difficult. So he had to travel all the way from Bogota to Lima to deliver documents and the writ of summons, the commencement of the proceedings. So he had to spend thousands of dollars just to initiate the civil procedure. That was very frustrating, and that was my very first experience with justice. And I told you this was 2006, and we're now in 2019, and my uncle's case is not over yet. And he's not the only one in the world. Around 4 billion people, mostly from developing countries, lack access to justice, according to the UN. And it is my opinion that this is because we still have procedure and forms that are pretty much as they were in Roman law. Actually, in law school, I had to do 2 years of Roman law, and part of it was they will have someone that will go and deliver the notice of the initiation of the process to the counterparty, pretty much what happened to my uncle. The thing is that he had to take a flight, international flight. So, all in all, the norms as they are ineffective, at least as they were. But in 2012, I discovered something that has become kind of my mission in life, and that's online dispute resolution. I was working back then for the Ministry of Justice, and I was doing what every good public servant should do right after lunch. I was Facebooking. And then when I saw Facebook, I found this website called judge.me, Judge Me. And I was like, what is it? I clicked on it, and it was an advertisement, and I found out online arbitration. And what I found out is that online arbitration and online dispute resolution had been on place ever since the beginning of the internet. eBay has had ODR systems ever since the 90s. So I was working for the Ministry of Justice. I was then appointed as Colombia's delegate to UNCITRAL. I never gave a speech, that was only for Facebook. But I was involved in the works of UNCITRAL for 3 years, and I met a lot of wonderful people, and I became even more passionate about this. That's why I've been doing it for the last 7 years. And I love it, I love it. So ODR, online dispute resolution, I think, is in the middle of our conversation today. And let me tell you why, from my perspective from the Colombian experience. We have regulation of electronic address for communications for both civil procedure and regular arbitration. Just as an example, I will deal with arbitration. According to Article 23 of Colombian Arbitration Statute, every single proceeding can take place electronically. But in particular, all communications may be served electronically. So apart from being a techno enthusiast, I also work in the regular arbitration proceedings. And as a secretary to an arbitration tribunal, I always send emails, even for the first writ of summons, to the first, what we call auto admisorio, the first proceedings of the arbitration. And then, of course, other means are open. If my arbitrator tells me, go and send the letter by certified mail, I will do it. I follow his instructions. But in general, what the Colombian legislation does, and that was 2012, is to allow for the opening of new electronic means, including email, and not necessarily certified email. Regular email is sufficient, provided that the counterparty appears to the process. And this is, if you come to see the benchmarking, and we've seen all of the examples before, Spain, Germany, the European Union, we already had a very good presentation about it. This is the standard of the world, allowing for the e-service. So this is not something that Colombia came up with. And more so, the US allows for even some decisions in 2002 for e-service through Facebook. So social media and email are permitted ways of notifying or servicing proceedings according to domestic laws. So what are the lessons I learned from the Colombian experience, from what we did? First, of course, there are obstacles. Of course, the system is far from perfect, but we can overcome them. And then we also have to embrace the technology as the future is now. So we need to take into account that, of course, we are opening a new gateway for electronic means, but that doesn't mean that regular servicing will not work. And then the options can still be open, so it will be naive to say, okay, so now only electronic service will be available. Of course, regular servicing can and has to be available because there are people who has no access to internet. And there can be a guarantee of due process. As has already been said in one of the presentations, due process is guaranteed as long as parties have the opportunity to appear, and once they have the information of the process, they can actually defend themselves. So there's a guarantee of due process with electronic means. And there are limits. So of course there are limits, but no system is perfect, as Ted said. So it's not a matter of if one is better than the other. None of them will be perfect, but one can be less imperfect than the other. If you see with the email, there are no duplicates, no formalities, fewer complications. So it makes life easier. So if we have all adopted electronic mail instead of regular mail, because I don't send letters anymore. I always send emails. So why should state don't follow suit? And let's get into what really matters here, the Hague Convention. How is this relevant for the Hague Convention? And these are points that have already been made, so I will go quickly on them. First one, address, according to Article 1 on the scope of the Hague Convention, is an open term. So it includes both electronic address and physical address. And then if we apply the Vienna Convention on the Law of the Treaties, Article 31, in the criteria for interpreting any international instrument, we have to do it in accordance to the ordinary meaning given to the terms in their context and in the light of its object and purpose. And if you use the Oxford Dictionary, if there's a word that is being used in wide sense, we shouldn't restrict its interpretation. So that's right next door. The ICJ has said it in many cases. including Australia versus Japan and Libya versus Chad, the ordinary meaning of the word should be sufficient. And if we have the Oxford Dictionary saying that physical address and electronic address are included within the terms of address in general, then we can say with confidence that both of them are included. In the context, the Hague Convention uses it in many terms without restricting it. So physical address is never specified. And in light of the object and purpose of the convention, if we desire to create appropriate means to ensure judicial and extrajudicial documents to be served in sufficient time, simplifying and expediting the procedure, we have to allow for the electronic means, for the use of technology. So then, when you think that you don't have, but if you have the electronic address, that makes life much more simple. We're getting into progress here. And then I will get back to what Brody says before, Article 10. So provided that the state of destination does not object, we can use postal channels. And I will get once again to the Oxford Dictionary. Postal means related to the post, and post includes posting or publishing online. So, in my opinion, and I think this is a broad interpretation, but in my opinion, via Article 10A, which was also the claim of Kathleen, we can have electronic servicing if we use it as a postal means. If we can interpret post as online posting or posting as the Article 37, if I'm not mistaken, of the Convention of Electronic Communications, we can also use it. So, of course, there will be the claim on sovereignty and the fact that we have to use many intermediaries. My claim is that if we use Article 10A, we will be able to make and to serve a document or the commencement of a proceeding from the beginning of the procedure without having to go to a central authority. So, in conclusion, well, if you restrict the possibility of e-servicing, then you will face the difficulties that my uncle faced. He spent a lot of money in this process only because he had a counterparty abroad, somewhere living outside of Colombia. And I would say, of course, e-servicing is an option, but it's not a mandatory one. So it is one of the options, which is not restricted by the convention. And finally, this is the trend that we're seeing all around the world. So we should embrace it as well. And of course, happy world. Well, I will say that we are in the midst of a justice revolution. And as such, we should be aware that in today's world, not a single leaf of a tree moves without the internet knowing. So it's much, much, much easier to locate a person online than it is to locate them in person. So this is, I think, where the world is going. Thank you very much.